Hello, I'm Corvin, and until the night my father died, I truly believed my family's cruelty had limits. But when the will was read, they proved me wrong. My brother walked away with $101 million, and they handed me a rotten garage and a torn envelope with a worthless lottery ticket inside. They laughed right in my face, said it suited a nobody like me. I tried to swallow the humiliation, tried to walk away quietly like I always did, until I opened that garage. And in the darkness, I realized they hadn't just cut me out. They'd made a mistake that was about to change everything. I've lived in Houston most of my life, long enough to know how heat can sit on your shoulders like a weight you never asked for. That morning, it felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the way the air in the legal office refused to move, or maybe it was the way everyone avoided looking at me, as if my chair had been placed there by mistake. I sat at the far end of the long conference table, hands folded, listening to the quiet tap of the attorney's pen. No one greeted me when I walked in. Dawson didn't even nod. Salira pretended to check her phone, and her parents acted like they were already deciding where to put new furniture in the estate they expected to inherit. I didn't say anything. I rarely do in moments like that. I learned over the years that the younger son who takes care of the hard work doesn't get the benefit of being seen. I stayed with Dad through his last months, watched him fade at a pace that broke me in ways I still can't fully explain. And yet I was the one sitting apart from the group, while Dawson, who barely showed up during that time, sat beside the attorney, relaxed and confident. When the reading began, the room held its breath. The attorney cleared his throat and opened the folder. Dawson leaned back. Salira smirked as if she already knew the punchline. Then the punchline arrived. The entire estate, every account, every share, the house, the company records, the legacy fund, went to Dawson. The words landed hard, but the room stayed still except for the Vaughns, who exchanged pleased looks. Then the attorney slid a small envelope toward me, torn, wrinkled. Inside was a single lottery ticket and the deed to a collapsing garage on the far edge of Dad's property. That was it. The Vaughns laughed, not even bothering to hide it. Dawson allowed himself a pleased half-smile before saying a line I will probably hear in my sleep for years. You should be grateful. Dad left you something that fits your skill set. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my face steady. If there's one thing I've learned, it's how to hold myself together when people want to see me crack. When the meeting was over, I gathered the envelope and the thin deed and headed toward the elevator. I just wanted to get out of that building before the weight of everything settled too hard on me. But Dawson stepped into my path, blocking the doors. Salira lingered a few steps behind him, arms crossed, looking entertained. Don't come by the house anymore, he said. Everything there is ours now. You got your garage. Go deal with that mess. Salira's father walked past me and muttered, Some people are born to stay small. He didn't wait for a response. I didn't give one. I walked out into the thick afternoon heat, feeling like someone had pressed a hand to the center of my back and pushed. I sat in my truck for a minute, letting the air conditioner work its way through the stale interior, trying to understand how any of this could be real. A part of me wondered if I had done something wrong, if I had missed something all these years. Dad always carried that wooden pen, the one he used only for decisions he called serious commitments. I kept thinking about that pen for reasons I couldn't explain. By the time the sun went down, I found myself driving toward the old property. I didn't rush. I needed the ride to settle my breathing, to quiet the storm that had been building since the moment the will was read. The farther I drove from the city lights, the more still the night became. When I turned onto the familiar dirt road, the yard lamp cast a thin circle of pale light over the dying grass. The house was dark, silent, empty in a way that didn't feel like peace. The garage sat at the edge of the yard, leaning to one side, its roof sagging. It looked like it had been abandoned long before Dad passed. For a second, I wondered if stepping inside would just make the day worse. But something in me insisted that I needed to walk in, if only to make sense of why Dad left it to me at all. I reached for the handle and lifted. The door screeched, metal grinding against metal. A sliver of light slipped across the floor. Something caught the light. Something sharp. Something I didn't expect. I froze. Breath caught halfway in my throat. In that breathless second, I realized the garage was not empty at all. That moment hung in the air as I steadied my hand on the metal door. The thin yard light pushed a weak glow across the cluttered interior, just enough for my eyes to start picking out shapes. At first, everything looked like shadows stacked on top of each other, but as I stepped past the threshold, things began to separate into familiar outlines. Shelves, a drafting table Dad never used after my mother passed, boxes arranged in a line that looked too deliberate to be junk, and a metal cabinet tucked against the back wall, the kind built to outlast storms. None of it made sense. Dad kept his house spotless, his workshop ordered, his desk cleared. He never stored things randomly. Seeing this place arranged with the same careful precision made something shift in my chest. I walked deeper inside, letting the door fall halfway behind me. The smell of old lumber mixed with motor oil rose around me, oddly comforting despite the day I'd had. I brushed dust from one of the boxes near my feet. Someone had written a year across the top, neat and centered, 1998. I stood still, taking that in. That was the year Dawson left for college. I hadn't connected the box to anything yet, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Dad's. I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, envelopes worn from use, notes in Dad's handwriting filling page after page. There were clipped articles about engineering ideas he'd never mentioned, sketches drawn with that same wooden pen he carried everywhere. Each folder inside the box felt like a window into a part of my father I'd never been invited to know. I realized he'd kept whole pieces of himself tucked away from both of us. For Dawson, it was probably an insult. For me, it felt like the kind of trust you don't talk about, but hope to earn. I opened another box, more logs, more notes, more pieces of a life I hadn't seen clearly while trying so hard not to upset the balance in our family. I caught myself wondering how many moments I'd let pass in silence, just trying to avoid conflict. Even as an adult, I'd kept that habit. When Dawson spoke louder, I'd stepped back. When Celira pushed her opinions into every room, I let her. Somewhere along the line, I convinced myself that silence kept the peace, even when it didn't. A quiet buzz from my phone pulled me out of the thought. I checked the screen. A message from someone at work, someone whose opinion had always been steady. Your brother's in-laws are telling people you showed up at the reading impaired. I thought you should know. A second message came through before I could respond. They're telling folks you've been unstable for years. I don't believe it, but it's spreading. I sat on a crate, letting the messages settle like dust. I wasn't surprised. The Vaughns never moved slowly when it came to shaping a narrative. Anger didn't come, just a tired sense of familiarity, the same feeling you get when someone repeats a pattern you hoped they'd grown past. I set the phone aside and looked again at the boxes. Dad had stored all of this in the one place Dawson would never bother searching. Maybe he knew something I hadn't. I moved toward the workbench, noticing how tools were lined up with deliberate spacing, how a small safe had been fitted into the wall, disguised by a piece of wood that didn't match the rest. A few folders lay slightly apart from the others. Each had Dawson's name written in careful lettering across the tab. Something in me tightened. Dad had left clues, and he'd left them where only someone patient, someone who didn't rush to judge or take, would find them. Not the favored son, not the one with the louder voice, the one who stayed quiet. A long moment passed before I stepped back toward the door. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to caution. I wasn't ready to open the cabinet or dig through what Dad had stored with so much intention. Not tonight. I needed rest, clarity, and a level head. The kind of thinking you do after your heartbeat settles. I locked the door behind me and walked to my truck. The wooden pen Dad always carried was still in my pocket. I'd forgotten I'd slipped it there while moving some papers earlier. I held it in my hand for a moment, letting the weight remind me of the way he'd tap it against his palm when he had something serious on his mind. I whispered into the quiet yard, "What were you trying to tell me?" I started the truck. As the headlights swept across the street, they lit up a car I hadn't noticed before. It sat halfway down the block, engine off, windows up. Someone was inside. They didn't move. They didn't leave. They simply watched the property as if they had a reason to stay hidden. I didn't know it yet, but that car would follow me for the next 3 days. That thought stayed with me through the night, even after I got home and forced myself to try resting. By early morning, when the sky was still a muted gray, I stepped back outside and started the truck. I didn't glance around the street at first. I just eased into traffic, letting the tires roll over the familiar roads I'd driven for years. But half a mile from my place, as I checked my rearview mirror out of simple habit, I saw it again. The same silver sedan, same shape, same slow pace, same distance. I adjusted my speed to see if the driver would back off. They didn't. When I changed lanes, they followed a beat later. I tried taking a turn I never used on weekday mornings, looping through a residential stretch lined with older homes and quiet sidewalks. The sedan made the same turn. Not rushed, not subtle, just steady. I thought about calling the police, but the words felt pointless in my mind before I could even dial. I didn't have a license plate number. I didn't have a threat, only a feeling. And feelings don't carry much weight when you're talking to someone whose job is to respond to emergencies. So I did what I'd done too many times before. I stayed quiet, stayed alert, and kept driving. By the time I reached the building where I worked, the sedan had turned off somewhere behind me, or maybe they parked where I couldn't see them. I wasn't sure. The morning haze made everything look softer except the knot forming in my stomach. Inside the office, most people acted like nothing was wrong. One coworker gave me a nod but kept walking before I could respond. Another, who usually talked my ear off about weekend fishing trips, stopped mid-sentence when he saw me and excused himself with a flimsy smile. I didn't have to ask why. Rumors travel through a city like Houston faster than any truth ever manages to. Someone must have repeated what Dawson's in-laws said, maybe added their own spin. When people want a story to be true, they rarely bother checking the facts. They just repeat it until it sticks. I tried focusing on the paperwork in front of me, but the words blurred. My mind drifted back to the garage, to the boxes arranged with such intention, to the drawings Dad never showed us, to the care he took in setting those things aside. And then, without warning, a memory pushed its way in. Dad and I standing in that same garage years ago. I was barely a teenager. He was showing me how to read property maps, pointing at the lines and angles while explaining how land carried stories if you knew how to look. He rested his hand on my shoulder the way he always did when he wanted me to pay close attention. "You don't have to talk loud to understand things deeply," he said. It was the closest he ever came to telling me he believed in me. That memory pulled me back to myself. By the end of the workday, I knew exactly where I needed to go. Not home, not anywhere familiar. Back to the garage. The sun had already dropped low when I reached the property again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I unlocked the door and stepped into the dim interior, letting the stillness close around me. I headed straight for the drafting table. Something about it had bothered me last night. The way the blueprints were layered unevenly, how a corner had been folded back as if someone wanted it to look untouched but didn't quite manage it. I lifted the top sheets. Underneath was a sealed envelope with my name written across it in Dad's handwriting. Seeing my name written that way pushed a wave of pressure through my chest. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single key and a short note. "Open only when you're ready to see the truth." The key's jagged shape was familiar. It belonged to the metal cabinet at the back of the garage, the same one I'd avoided opening. I held it between my fingers, feeling the weight of everything it implied. Dad had planned this. He'd left it for me deliberately. Not for Dawson, not for anyone else. I turned toward the cabinet, but something on the floor stopped me. A mark near the safe. Not a smudge from me. Not one of Dad's old boot prints either. This one was sharper, more recent. Someone else had been here. I crouched to look closer and noticed tiny scratches by the side door lock. Fresh, not weathered, not old. The image of the silver sedan flashed through my mind. Someone had come into this place with purpose, and they weren't finished. I stood slowly, letting the reality settle. All my life, I'd handled trouble by stepping back, by choosing silence, or by hoping things would settle if I didn't push them. But standing in that garage with the key in my hand and someone else's footprint in front of me, something shifted. "For once," I said out loud, "I'm not letting anyone else decide where this goes." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They were meant for me. I walked to the cabinet and fit the key into the lock. Before I turned it, a bright sweep of light crossed the window. Headlights. I knew the angle before I even looked. The sedan was back, easing toward the property in a slow, deliberate crawl. I stepped toward the door, determined to see who had been watching me, and the heavy air outside met me as I crossed the threshold. The last of the daylight had faded, leaving only the dull glow from the street lamp that sat unevenly over the front edge of the property. The silver sedan rolled to a stop in the driveway, its headlights dimming slowly before the engine shut off. For a second, I braced myself for a stranger. Someone from a bank, a private investigator, someone I'd never seen. Instead, the driver's door opened and Marcus stepped out like he'd been rehearsing the moment. His clothes looked expensive enough to pass for business attire, though he wasn't coming from work. He carried himself with a confidence that had always been his chosen disguise, chewing gum as if it made him appear unbothered. He scanned the land like he'd already claimed it. Before I could say anything, the other doors opened. Vera slid out with her phone in hand, already holding it at an angle that made me uneasy, and her brother Landon followed behind her like he'd been dragged along but wanted to make the most of it. The three of them stood together near the sedan, forming a wall of self-satisfaction. It didn't take long to understand this wasn't a coincidence. They hadn't just followed me. They had waited for me to come back here. Marcus walked forward with a grin he reserved for moments when he wanted to put someone below him. "So this is the grand inheritance," he announced, waving an arm at the garage behind me. A sad structure and a useless ticket. Pretty fitting, wouldn't you say? Vera lifted her phone and tilted her head, speaking in that sing-song voice she used whenever she was performing for an audience. Just capturing a moment for the family chat. Look at this place. It's like a storage closet no one wanted. Landon laughed and tapped the side of the garage as if testing its strength. "Corvin's mansion," he said. "Truly one of a kind." Their voices weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. They'd mastered the art of delivering insults that sank under your skin without drawing outside attention. A lifetime of subtle strikes, each one meant to diminish me just enough. I kept my posture steady, though my jaw tightened until it felt like stone. Marcus strutted closer. "Let's look inside," he said, brushing past me and heading toward the open doorway. "We might as well document the full tour. People won't believe how bad it is." I stepped in front of him before he crossed the threshold. The key from Dad's envelope weighed against my pocket, grounding me. "You're not coming in," I said. He seemed amused that I'd even tried to stop him. "Says who? You? Come on, Corvin. You're clinging to scraps. Everyone knows it." He had always said things like that. Not directly cruel. Just cutting enough to leave a mark you couldn't prove he meant. Before I could respond, Vera moved beside him. She held her phone higher, recording me more openly now. "We should just tell you," she said. "Marcus has every right to be here. There's another will reading in 2 days. An addendum. And when it happens, you might not have the garage anymore." I blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about?" She smiled like she enjoyed delivering bad news. "Your father used this land for a major loan at one point. There's paperwork showing it was supposed to transfer to Marcus's kids. We're making sure things are handled correctly." The words hit me harder than her tone. They weren't here to mock me. They were preparing to take the last thing Dad had left in my hands. Behind her, Landon circled the building slowly, filming the walls, the ground, the doors, as if collecting evidence. I wanted to tell him to leave, but the words stuck in my chest. A memory surfaced. Me at 15. Dad kneeling beside me while we worked on replacing a hinge inside this very garage. He had looked me in the eyes and said, "One day, you'll understand why we built this place together." I hadn't understood then. I barely understood now, but I felt it rising inside me. The sense that this garage meant far more than they realized. The pressure inside the room grew tighter as Marcus stepped back toward the entrance. He gestured at me as if daring me to shove him. "Go on," he said. "Give Vera the outburst she wants on camera." Vera walked past me, brushing my shoulder intentionally, circling the structure again. Marcus kept talking under his breath, little remarks he knew would get under my skin. Landon leaned against the doorway like a guard, shaking his head as though disappointed in me. The dust print near the safe crossed my vision again, and in that moment everything locked together. Someone had been inside long before they arrived, and now they were doing everything they could to intimidate me into losing control. I stepped back into the garage, keeping space between us. My fingers brushed the key again, though I didn't remove it. I felt its edge against my palm as a reminder that Dad had trusted me with something real, something he didn't trust anyone else to see. Marcus looked at the cabinet behind me. "What are you hiding in here, Corvin?" My hand tightened instinctively. My hand froze on the lock as Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and the click of that door sounded louder than it should have. The space tightened. The air in the garage felt warmer, thicker, like the old walls were holding their breath right along with me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear Vera outside adjusting her phone and Landon shifting his weight on the gravel, waiting for the next scene to unfold. Marcus moved closer, slow and deliberate, pretending he was simply examining the place. He dragged his fingertips across a shelf, lifted a hammer, knocked it once on the workbench, put it back out of line, then walked in a lazy circle that let him watch me without looking directly at me. It wasn't curiosity. It was a tactic he'd used on people his entire life: hover, inspect, unsettle. Vera poked her head inside, camera raised, her voice steady and sweet. "Make sure he's not hiding anything," she said, as if this were some sort of public service. Landon leaned against the frame, phone already recording again. They were making this into a performance, a cornering, a slow tightening of the walls until I reacted the way they needed. But the weight of Rowan's key in my hand kept my breathing even. I focused on that small anchor, the one thing in the room that belonged to me and me alone. Marcus brushed dust off an old toolbox, humming low like he was bored. "You know," he said, "Dad sure had a strange sense of humor. Leaving you with this." His eyes swept the garage, dismissive. "Kind of says a lot." He reached for a jar of nails, turned it over, and set it down loudly. I could feel irritation burning under my ribs, but I kept still. He walked over to the metal cabinet and tapped it with 2 knuckles, the sound sharp and hollow. "What's in here, Corvin?" he asked. "Anything worth more than a couple $100? Because honestly, that's pushing it." He said it casually, almost lightly, but the intention behind it was pointed. He suspected something. He didn't know what, but he could feel there was something here I valued, and he wanted to pry it out of me. Before I answered, Landon stepped fully inside for the first time. He wasn't smiling anymore. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim folder, shaking it a little like he wanted to be sure I saw it. "These are documents tied to the property," he said. "Financial agreements, collateral history. You might want to look before you get too comfortable." "What agreements?" I asked. "The kind that make this land contested," he said. "Rowan used it to back some of Marcus's ventures years ago. Money's involved. And when money's involved, so are we." The words hit with a weight I recognized. He wasn't bluffing. They hadn't come here impulsively, stirred up by emotion. They came prepared. They'd planned this long before Rowan's funeral, maybe long before Rowan's health even turned. Then, Vera entered, recording openly now. She lifted her phone with both hands like she was documenting a crime scene. "We already have footage," she said, "of you digging around last night, opening drawers, talking to yourself, looking, let's just say, stressed." "So?" I asked, though my voice felt tight around the edges. "So we're protecting the family's interests," she said. "You wandering around this place in the dark, looking jumpy, it paints a picture, one that won't help you if this goes to probate." She didn't say the rest, but I didn't need her to. This wasn't about concern. It was narrative. They wanted to show I was unstable, confused, unpredictable, someone who shouldn't be trusted with anything of value, someone easy to push out of the picture. That realization hit harder than I expected. Not fear, Something simpler. Acceptance. No matter what I did, no matter how quietly I lived or how much I stayed out of their conflicts, they would never see me as part of the family they were trying to protect. They wouldn't give me the benefit of the doubt. They wouldn't give me a moment of grace. I had spent half my life hoping they would, and it had never mattered. What mattered was Rowan. What Rowan left. What Rowan intended. That thought steadied me. Marcus took another slow lap around the garage, stopping near the drafting table. "Look at you," he said softly, "guarding this place like it means something." I walked past him without flinching and positioned myself directly between them and the cabinet. I kept my shoulders level and my voice steady. "If you're planning to file something, then file it. But until then, get out." The shift in my tone must have startled them. Marcus stepped closer, trying to loom over me the way he used to when we were younger. But this time, he didn't get the reaction he wanted. I didn't move. I didn't step back. I just stayed still. For the first time since they arrived, he hesitated. Something must have snapped inside him because his hand jumped toward the workbench. He grabbed a wrench, holding it loosely by the handle. "Relax," he said, waving it as if he was joking. "I'm not going to hit anything." But even he heard the tension in his voice. "Marcus," Landon warned quietly, "cut it out." Vera lifted her phone higher. "Keep going," she whispered. "This will help later." Marcus swung the wrench toward a low shelf, knocking it hard enough to shatter a jar. Glass scattered across the floor in sharp fragments. He laughed like it was a minor accident. He didn't notice the small detail I saw immediately. The faint engraving on the bottom of the jar. Rowan's initials. Dad had carved them himself when I was younger, after we finished sorting tools during one long weekend. That jar wasn't just a container, it was a memory. And Marcus had crushed it without a second thought. Heat rose in my chest, but I didn't yell. I didn't shake. I stepped forward, stopping only when I was close enough that he had to look at me fully. "You shouldn't have touched that," I said. He froze. Marcus's smile faded as he finally realized I wasn't bluffing anymore. And for a long second, neither of us moved. I kept my hand near the cabinet, steady, while the drizzle outside tapped gently against the garage roof. The sound softened the tension just enough for me to breathe. He stood close, too close, but I didn't shift. I wanted him to feel that something in me was different, that the quiet he used to mistake for weakness no longer belonged to him. The air inside the garage felt colder as he lowered the wrench. His knuckles were pale, and he kept glancing toward Vera and Landon as if searching for backup. Vera kept her phone elevated, recording every breath. Landon muttered something under his breath, urging Marcus to drop it and step back. But pride held him in place. Oddly, it wasn't fear running through me. It was Rowan's steady presence, the memory of him standing in the same room teaching me how to stay grounded when someone tried to rattle me. Marcus began pacing, circling me like a man pretending he still had control. He leaned toward the shelves, tapped boxes with his fingertips, and tossed a look over his shoulder. "You act like any of this means something," he said. "You're lucky we even kept you around. Dad always had this strange, soft spot for you." His voice had that familiar edge, the same one he carried when we were boys and he wanted to knock me down a few inches. I didn't rise to the bait. His words slid toward me, but they didn't land the way he intended. Rowan had spoken differently to me. He spoke with purpose. Marcus spoke to wound. Vera suddenly stopped filming, only for a moment. as if she wanted to savor her next line. "Marcus, just tell him. He deserves to know. Dad didn't even want to leave him this old thing. We told the attorney it'd keep him from embarrassing the family in court." She said it with a straight face, but the pleasure sat right under her tone. My chest tightened, not because I believed her, but because she believed herself. She continued, "The addendum was drafted at our place. You were never meant to get anything more than a formality, Corvin." She pressed the words like they were gifts. Everything in me went still. Years of errands, late-night hospital visits, paperwork, repairs, and long drives to help Rowan. All of it dismissed in a single sentence. For a moment, it felt like something inside me folded inward. But then the feeling shifted. I wasn't breaking. I was waking up to what had been in front of me all along. They never saw me, and they never tried to. I glanced around the garage, the worn concrete floor, the careful arrangement of tools, the faint oil scent that had lived here for decades. Every part of this place held Rowan's hands, his order, his intention. He had built this space with a purpose, and he had trusted me to understand it one day. That thought lit something steady inside me. Marcus tried another angle. He moved toward the cabinet again, confident I'd step aside out of habit. But I didn't. I placed my palm over the lock, not touching him, just claiming space. Landon straightened his posture. "Marcus, don't force it," he said. "You break anything in here, and that's a legal issue. You know how that looks." Vera lowered her phone a fraction, studying my face like she was trying to decipher what changed. Marcus realized then he had walked himself into a corner. He was the only one acting without control, and he didn't like that truth settling on him. "Leave," I said. My voice came out even, almost quiet, but it filled the room. "If you have real paperwork, bring it. Until then, get off this property." The three of them exchanged looks. Landon broke first. He stepped backward. Vera followed, irritation flickering when she realized she had nothing useful to post or twist. Marcus lingered, jaw tight, but eventually he backed toward the door, muttering about how this wasn't over. The drizzle outside turned into a steadier rain. Their car pulled away, red lights fading into the night. For the first time in hours, the garage felt like mine again. I exhaled slowly, letting the quiet settle. Then I turned back to the cabinet. My fingers wrapped around the key, and I paused, imagining Rowan standing a few steps behind me the way he used to. I whispered, "Whatever you left me, I need it now." I leaned in, inserted the key, and turned it. The lock clicked open, and the first thing I saw inside made my breath catch in my throat. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the metallic scent of the cabinet mix with the damp air drifting in from the rain. My hand steadied against the frame as I reached toward the top shelf, where a thick envelope waited. My name was written across the front in Rowan's careful handwriting, the same handwriting he used whenever something mattered. Seeing it felt like stepping into a memory I wasn't prepared for. I lifted the envelope with both hands. The weight surprised me. It wasn't heavy, but it was dense, like it carried years instead of papers. I slipped it open and unfolded the contents on the workbench where Rowan once showed me how to straighten wood that had bowed under heat. Inside were several documents. I recognized the first one immediately. A deed. The garage wasn't just a single structure. It sat on a larger stretch of land that curved behind the main building, land no one had mentioned at the will reading. Land Marcus never asked about because he assumed he already owned everything worth owning. I flattened the deed against the bench, tracing the boundary lines with my fingertip. The parcel extended all the way to the old pecan trees. Rowan had kept that secret quiet. Next came a set of financial ledgers, years of numbers, handwritten and neat, charting small but steady investments. They led to an account tied to my name alone. Rowan had been moving pieces behind the scenes, arranging things only I could access. My throat tightened as I turned the pages. He trusted me. Not Marcus, not the in-laws, me. At the bottom of the stack was Rowan's letter. I knew the paper before I even unfolded it. He used that stationery for contracts, decisions, things he wanted on record. The ink was slightly smudged at the edges as if his hands shook when he wrote it. He spoke plainly, in the way he often did when he wanted the truth to land without confusion. He wrote about seeing how I was treated. He wrote about Marcus chasing validation, about Vera manipulating every room she entered, about Landon's habit of twisting problems until someone else took the blame. He wrote about watching me carry responsibilities quietly, without asking for recognition. You were the one who stayed, he wrote, the one who listened, the one who built with me. I'm leaving this to you because you understand the work, not the glory. I read those lines 3 times, letting them sink into the places that had been scraped raw by the evening. A small brass key fell from the envelope as I refolded the letter. A tag hung from it that read, Office, Back Wall. I knew the extension he meant. A little room behind the garage, its window always covered. I'd walked past it for years, assuming it stored junk. I moved toward the back of the garage, sliding my hand along the wall until I reached a tall shelving unit. It took effort to shift it aside. Behind it was a narrow door, almost hidden in the shadows. The key clicked smoothly in the lock, and the hinges groaned as I pushed it open. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, pulling the small office out of darkness. Filing cabinets lined the walls, not random ones, organized, labeled, sharp. Rowan had kept records of everything he never said aloud. I opened the first drawer. Inside were files documenting Marcus's failed business attempts, tax irregularities suggested by the in-laws, and signatures Rowan refused to provide. Each document was damning, and each was meticulous. Rowan wasn't just protecting me, he was preparing me. On the second shelf sat a binder with my name on it. I opened it slowly. Inside were notes Rowan kept about every project we built together. The shed roof we repaired during a summer storm. The truck engine we brought back to life after everyone else gave up on it. The responsibilities he trusted me with. Proof that my work had mattered, even if the others pretended it didn't. A final page referenced a USB drive, one that matched the small device in the envelope. Rowan's note said it contained everything needed to expose the in-laws' financial misconduct if they ever tried to overturn his decision. My pulse thudded in my ears. Rowan hadn't left a scrap. He left a shield. Understanding washed through me slowly, like warmth returning to a chilled hand. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about leverage, protection, and truth. For the first time, I felt ahead of Marcus instead of behind. I slipped the documents back into the envelope and clicked off the office light. The rain had grown steadier outside, tapping in long, rhythmic lines across the roof. As I stepped back into the garage, a sound cut through the rainfall, a soft thud, followed by a quick shuffle of feet. I froze. Another sound. The muted click of a car door closing. I moved toward the front window cautiously, staying out of sight. Across the street, a dark vehicle sat at an angle, headlights off. It wasn't the silver sedan. It wasn't any car I recognized. Someone new was watching. I waited for movement, my breath shallow. Then the headlights blinked on for a brief second, catching the edge of the garage door before shutting off again, leaving the street in darkness. My breath caught as the silhouette stepped out of the car and walked straight toward Rowan's garage. Rain blurred their outline, turning every movement into a dark smear across the driveway. Instinct kicked in. I slipped back from the office doorway and pulled the garage door halfway down until only a thin line of streetlight cut across the concrete. I didn't want to reveal how much I'd found, not yet. The envelope stayed pressed against my chest, warm from my grip. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. A heavy breath followed, deep enough that I recognized the rhythm before the knock even came. 3 firm taps, spaced evenly. Whoever stood outside already knew I was inside. I held still, breathing through my nose, trying to decide whether to speak or wait them out. A voice broke through the rain. "Corvin, it's Gregory Vance. Open up. We need to talk." It wasn't the voice of a man who came to make trouble. It was the voice of someone carrying weight. I lifted the door just enough for him to step inside. Water ran down his coat in steady streams, pooling near his shoes. He clutched a leather briefcase that looked heavier than paperwork should allow. I'd only ever seen Gregory behind a desk or across a conference table. Seeing him soaked under the flickering yard lamp made my stomach knot. He didn't waste time. "You're in danger of losing everything Rowan left you. They filed an emergency motion this afternoon." My shoulders tightened. "Who did?" "Marcus, Vera, Landon. Their whole side of the family," he said, wiping rain from his brow. "They're accusing you of breaking into the garage and tampering with property. They're using her recordings as evidence." I could almost hear Vera's voice in my head, affecting her usual sweetness while she twisted the knife. Gregory set the briefcase on Rowan's old workbench and exhaled sharply. "They're asking the county to seal the property until your hearing. If the sheriff signs the order, everything in here becomes inaccessible." My stomach dropped. "How long do I have?" "Less than 24 hours. His tone left no room for doubt. He opened the briefcase. Inside were several folders, some old, some new, all meticulously organized. He lifted a sealed envelope from the center and handed it to me. My name was written on the front in Rowan's handwriting, along with today's date. I slipped the seal open and unfolded the pages inside. Rowan had prepared a directive years before his illness, one the family didn't know existed. If anyone challenged my right to inherit the garage or the land behind it, Rowan's confidential records were to be released to the appropriate authorities, records detailing everything he'd uncovered about Marcus's in-laws, financial misconduct, pressured signatures, attempts to gain control of assets through intimidation. And the executor of that release wasn't Gregory. It was me. The letter trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from realization. I stood there absorbing every word Rowan left behind, and, for the first time, the full weight of his trust settled over me. "Rowan knew this would happen," Gregory said quietly. "He planned for it." Rain hammered harder against the roof as I folded the paperwork and tucked it deep inside my jacket. My pulse steadied with a new kind of clarity, sharp, directional, familiar, in a way I hadn't felt since I worked beside Rowan in this very space. Then the screech of tires tore through the night. Gregory and I both turned. Headlights cut through the rain, white and violent. Marcus's sedan slid to a stop across the driveway. Landon's truck pulled up beside it. Vera's SUV eased in behind them, her phone already raised like a weapon. They spilled out into the rain, shouting before they even reached the garage. Marcus led the charge, fury twisting every line of his face. "Open up, Corvin, right now!" Gregory stepped toward the door, but I placed a hand on his arm. "This isn't your fight," I said quietly. "They came for me." And I'd stopped running. I swung the garage door open. Rain sliced across the concrete, catching the edges of my jacket. Marcus lunged forward, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "You're trespassing on property that doesn't belong to you," he shouted. "Hand over whatever you stole from inside." Vera angled her phone, recording as if she were documenting a crime. Landon was already threatening to call the sheriff, pretending he had authority he didn't possess. Gregory stepped between us and held up a hand, his voice cut clean through the rain. "This property is legally Corvin's. Any attempt to forcibly enter or interfere with documents in his possession violates state law." Porch lights blinked on across the street. Neighbors stepped into the glow of their front windows, watching. Marcus hadn't expected an audience. He hadn't expected to be the one exposed. He stepped closer, voice trembling with rage. "What the hell did Dad leave you? What are you hiding?" I reached into my jacket, pulled out Rowan's letter, and met his eyes with a calm he didn't understand. "Everything you were never meant to touch." My voice carried farther than I expected. Rain tapped against the concrete, steady and cold, and the street stayed strangely quiet. The neighbors who'd come out earlier still lingered under porch lights, watching without saying a word. Marcus froze in front of me, his breath sharp, his expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. I held Rowan's letter out just enough for him to see its worn edges. Dad wasn't confused. He wasn't pressured. He chose this. He chose me. The rain rolled down my sleeves as I lifted the page and read only the parts meant for open air. "That garage is Corvin's because he earned it. He carried me when no one else did. He showed up when others disappeared." No one spoke. Even the rain seemed to soften. Marcus's jaw worked like he wanted to spit out a comeback, but couldn't form one. Vera lowered her phone slowly, realizing the recording wasn't giving her the story she wanted. Landon shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable being part of the scene. Gregory stepped forward with the calm of a man who'd seen this moment coming. He explained the parcels of land, the ledgers, the directive Rowan signed long before any illness. He didn't mention the incriminating material. He didn't need to. "If you continue your injunction," he said, "all of Rowan's private records will be reviewed in court. All of them." Marcus blanched. Vera blinked rapidly, trying to calculate the fallout. Landon muttered something too low to catch. Their confidence thinned like fog in headlights. Then another vehicle rolled up, slow and deliberate. A dark sedan, unfamiliar. The passenger door opened and Ruth stepped out. Vera's mother, the one who built half the family's reputation on charm and intimidation. I expected her to march toward Marcus. Instead, she walked straight to Gregory. She handed him a sealed envelope. "I warned them," she said, voice steady. "I told them to leave the boy alone." Boy. The word didn't sting. For the first time, it felt protective. Gregory opened the envelope just far enough to see the contents. His eyes widened slightly. Inside were bank records, screenshots, and statements showing Marcus's in-laws pressuring him to seize control of Rowan's assets. It was betrayal from within their own ranks, and the effect was immediate. Marcus's shoulders sagged. He turned toward Vera with disbelief. "You told her everything?" Vera shot back, accusing him of dragging her into a disaster built on his pride. Landon blamed both of them. Ruth said nothing more, only folded her arms and let the storm roll off her. Watching them unravel didn't bring joy, just clarity. The rain softened their silhouettes until they looked less like villains and more like people lost in the consequences of their own choices. Rowan once told me, "Some folks get raised with the wrong definition of strength." Standing there, I finally understood what he meant. Gregory leaned in. "If you take all this to the judge, you win. Every point." And he was right. One filing could break Marcus's business, his marriage, even his freedom. Rowan built the means, but he also left me a line I couldn't ignore. Return fire only to defend, not to destroy. I stepped forward. "I'm not filing anything, as long as you walk away from the garage and the land. You stop following me, stop recording me, stop twisting my name into something it's not. You want this to end. It ends tonight." The words hung there, suspended between us. Marcus stared at me with confusion and something close to shame. Mercy wasn't the language he knew. Strength without cruelty was foreign to him. They backed away one by one. Vera climbed into her SUV, wiping rain from her cheeks. Anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Landon muttered a curt goodbye. Marcus lingered the longest, eyes darting between me and the soaked pavement, as if searching for a version of the world where he still held the upper hand. When he found none, he turned and left. Ruth stayed. She touched my arm gently. "You're nothing like them." Rowan knew. Then she, too, disappeared into the rain. By morning, the storm had passed. Gregory and I drove to the courthouse, the sky a pale gray curtain above us. Inside, the clerk recognized Gregory immediately and processed the property transfer without hesitation. Marcus's emergency motion had already been withdrawn. No hearing necessary. The clerk stamped the final page. "You're all set, Mr. Hale." Just like that, the fight was over. That evening, I returned to the garage alone. The air smelled of damp soil and sun-warmed concrete. I opened the metal cabinet and placed Rowan's letter back inside, smoothing the crease like I was settling something to rest. Then I walked the length of the land behind the building, taking in every inch of it, imagining what could be built, what Rowan hoped I'd build. A workshop, a small house, a place that didn't belong to anyone's version of me except my own. "I get it now," I said softly. "Thank you." When I locked the garage for the night, the weight that had followed me for decades finally lifted. Rowan never left me scraps. He left me my life back,